Welcome to the show. In this episode, we are going to take a look at memory, how it functions, how we remember, how we forget, and the interesting intricacies about it. So let's dive right in. Why we forget most of the books we read. Pamela Paul's memories of reading are less about words and more about the experience. I can almost always remember where I was, and I remember the book itself. I remember the physical object, says Paul, former editor of the New York Times Book Review, who reads, it is fair to say, a lot of books. I remember the edition. I remember the cover. I usually remember where I bought it or who gave it to me. What I don't remember, and it's terrible, is everything else. For example, Paul says she had recently finished reading Walter Isaacson's biography on Benjamin Franklin. While I read that book, I knew not everything there was to know about Ben Franklin, but much of it, and I knew the general timeline of the American Revolution, she says. Right now, 2 days later, I probably could not give you the timeline of the American Revolution. Surely, some people can read a book or watch a movie once and retain the plot perfectly. But for many, the experience of consuming culture is like filling up a bathtub, soaking in it, and then watching the water run down the drain. It might leave a film in the tub, but the rest is gone. Memory generally has a very intrinsic limitation, says Faria Sana, an assistant professor of psychology at Athabasca University in Canada. It's essentially a bottleneck. The forgetive curve, as it's called, is steepest during the first 24 hours after you learn something. Exactly how much you forget percentage-wise varies, but unless you review the material, much of it slips down the drain after the first day, with more to follow in the days after, leaving you with a fraction of what you took in. This is a good point to stop and use this as a PR lesson. The more you write, the better you become at it, whether it's thought leadership pieces, speeches for executives at your company or a client, some talking notes for a moderator or a speaker on stage, press releases, blog posts, you name it, things of that nature. And even with the rules of PR, the rules of engagement, media relations, things of that nature, the more you repeat things, the more you remember them, the more they become second nature to you, to the point where you can do it in your sleep. I mean, we all remember it from our school days. And those of you who are still in school, when you have to revise, so you go to a lecture, you take notes. Writing things down actually helps it be ingrained in your memory, right? You look at it again a couple of days later, you revise and you revise and you revise till it sticks. You don't just do it one time. So take that piece of advice and use it with you in your media and PR careers. Presumably, memory has always been like this. But Jared Horvath, a research fellow at the University of Melbourne, says that the way people now consume information and entertainment has changed what type of memory we value. And it's not the kind that helps you hold onto the plot of a movie you saw 6 months ago. I think what he's alluding to here is that in modern society, in today's world, everything is in snack bites, right? Everything is in snapshots, very quick. Attention span has diminished. In the internet age, recall memory, the ability to spontaneously call information up in your mind, has become less necessary. Thank you, Google. Thank you, search. It's still good for bar trivia or remembering your to-do list, but largely, Horvath says, what's called recognition memory is more important. So long as you know where that information is at and how to access it, then you don't really need to recall it, he says. I have a good example there. I still remember the landline phone number of my childhood home from probably when I was 7 years old. But I couldn't tell you for $1,000,000 my former cell phone numbers from 6 to 7 years ago. It's interesting, right? That you can remember a number sequence from back in the day of using rotary phones, but there's no need to remember your friends' phone numbers anymore. They're on your phone. You can look them up. Let's dive back in. Research has shown that the internet functions as sort of externalized memory. When people expect to have future access to information, they have lower rates of recall of the information itself. Exactly. Again, back in the day, I probably knew 10 phone numbers, my mom's, my dad's, friends, etc. Now I don't. The information is accessible. So that's what one study says. But even before the internet existed, entertainment products have served as externalized memories for themselves. You don't need to remember a quote from a book if you can just look it up. Once videotapes came along, you could review a movie or TV show fairly easily. There's not a sense that if you don't burn a piece of culture into your brain, that it will be lost forever. With its streaming services and Wikipedia articles, the internet has lowered the stakes on remembering the culture we consume even further. But it's hardly as if we remembered it all before. Plato was a famous early commercial when it came to the dangers of externalizing memory. In the dialogue Plato wrote between Socrates and the aristocrat Phaedrus, Socrates tells a story about the god Theos discovering the use of letters. The Egyptian king Thjamus says to Theos, "This discovery of yours will create forgetfulness in the learners' souls because they will not use their memories. They will trust to the external written characters and not remember of themselves." Of course, Plato's ideas are only accessible to us today because he wrote them down. So, within that dialogue, Socrates hates writing because he thinks it's going to kill memory, Horvath says. And he's right. Writing absolutely killed memory. But think of all the incredible things we got because of writing. I wouldn't trade writing for better recall memory ever. Perhaps the internet offers a similar trade-off. You can access and consume as much information and entertainment as you want, but you won't retain most of it. We can liken that to GPS. Back in the day, one probably knew how to get to school, to the grocery store, to your friends, to different destinations, maybe 8 to 10 different places by memory. Now with GPS, Google Maps, and Waze, and Apple Maps, etc., there is no need to memorize the way somewhere. You can just use GPS, and depending on the day and the traffic, you're given different routes anyway. So why memorize that one way to get there? So it's a trade-off. It's true that people often shove more into their brains than they can possibly hold. Last year, Horvath and his colleagues at the University of Melbourne found that those who binge-watched TV shows forgot the content of them much more quickly than people who watched one episode a week. Right? Remember the days where you'd watch an episode of your favorite show and have to wait till same time, same place next week to watch episode 2, 3, and 4? Now we can just watch the entire season on Netflix. Right after finishing the show, the binge watchers scored the highest on a quiz about it. But after 140 days, they scored lower than the weekly viewers. They also reported enjoying the show less than did people who watched it once a day or weekly. People are binging on the written word too. In 2009, the average American encountered 100,000 words a day, even if they didn't read all of them. It's hard to imagine that's decreased in the 9 years since. In binge reading disorder, an article for the Morning News, Nikita Bakshani analyzes the meaning of this statistic. Reading is a nuanced word, she writes, but the most common kind of reading is likely reading as consumption, where we read, especially on the internet, merely to acquire information. So that information that stands no chance of becoming knowledge unless it sticks. That information has no chance. We just read it, use it, and it's gone. Or, as Horvath puts it, it's the momentary giggle, and then you want another giggle. It's not about actually learning anything. It's about getting a momentary experience to feel as though you've learned something. Don't we all do that? We want to seem smart. We want to be smart. The lesson from his binge-watching study is that if you want to remember the things you watch and read, space them out. This is another key point for us professionals out there. Don't try to do a little bit of each project in one day. Finish one, complete it, review it, and move on to the next. Give yourself time. Space things out. Think through things properly. We've got word processors. We've got computers. Now we have AI. That means we can get more done. Does it necessarily mean that you should do everything in one day? Probably not. Things still got done when we were writing with pen and paper. Then came the word processor. Keep in mind, do things thoroughly. So, again, the lesson from his binge-watching study is that if you want to remember the things you watch and read, space them out. He used to get, irritated at school when an English class syllabus would have them read only 3 chapters a week. But there was a good reason for that. Memories get reinforced the more you recall them, Horvath says. If you read a book all in one stretch, on an airplane, say you're just holding the story in your working memory that whole time. You're never actually reassessing it, he says. That's happened to me recently. I read the book As a Man Thinketh. I think I read 3/4 of it in one sitting and then finished the book the next day. I remember some of the quotes and lessons because I wrote them down to refer to them another time. But to tell you what the full book is about, I probably couldn't. I think I read it too quickly. I couldn't put it down. It's a great book. Go read it. As a Man Thinketh. Sana says that often when we read, there is a false feeling of fluency. The information is flowing in. We're understanding it. It seems like it is smoothly collating itself into a binder to be sorted onto the shelves of our brains. But it actually doesn't stick unless you put effort into it and concentrate and engage in certain strategies that will help you remember. People might do that when they study or read something for work, but it seems unlikely that in their leisure time they're going to take notes on Gilmore Girls to quiz themselves later. You could be seeing and hearing, but you might not be noticing and listening, Sena says, which is most of the time what we do. Still, not all memories that wander are lost. Good news. Some of them may just be lurking, inaccessible until the right cue pops them back up. Perhaps a pre-episode previously on Gilmore Girls, recap, or a conversation with a friend about a book you've both read. Memory is all associations, essentially, Sana says. That may explain why Paul and others remember the context in which they read a book without remembering its contents. Paul has kept a book of books, or Bob, since she was in high school, an analog form of externalized memory in which she writes down every book she reads. Bob offers immediate access to where I've been psychologically and geographically at any given moment in my life. She explains in My Life with Bob, a book she wrote about her book of books. Very interesting. Each entry conjures a memory that may have otherwise gotten lost or blurred with time. In a piece for The New Yorker called The Curse of Reading and Forgetting, Ian Crouch writes, "Reading has many facets, one of which might be the rather indescribable, naturally fleeting mix of thought and emotion and sensory manipulations that happen in the moment and then fade. How much of reading, then, is just a kind of narcissism, a marker of who you were and what you were thinking when you encountered a text?" That reminds me, I've been trying to read The Runaway Jury. I keep reading a few chapters, starting over, reading a few chapters. I need to go back to that book. It's a great book. The movie's fantastic also. I love John Grisham. To me, it doesn't seem like narcissism to remember life's seasons by the arts that filled them. The spring of romance novels, the winter of true crime. But it's true enough that if you consume culture in the hopes of building a mental library that can be referred to at any time, you're likely to be disappointed. Books, shows, movies, and songs aren't files we upload to our brains. They're part of the tapestry of life, woven in with everything else. From a distance, it may become harder to see a single thread clearly, but it's still in there. It'd be really cool if memories were just clean. Information comes in, and now you have a memory for that fact, Horvath says. But in truth, all memories are everything. That's it for this episode. Very interesting. I hope you were able to learn something about repetition, right? That's how we remember songs, listening to them over and over again to remember the lyrics. It's how we study for exams. And so in future, that we're not just reading just to read. Try to keep some of the things you read that are necessary through practice. So thanks for stopping by. Please head to buymeacoffee.com/SamsonKing. Link is up in the description. Please support the channel there. We appreciate it. Please like the video. That helps us in terms of YouTube's algorithms and to create more content that we know you like. Please subscribe to the channel. And thanks for stopping by. We'll see you next time.